So I'm going to start with Alice Aycock, who's, I think, traveled the farthest to be with us today. Alice.
The first thing I'd like to say before I begin is I'd like to give special thanks to Susan Pontius of the Arts Commission for working tirelessly with me on this project. I think we probably have sustained the longest running phone conversation, 5 years. My phone practically is connected into her brain, I think. And I just want to thank her. I could never have managed to pull this off without her ceaselessly working and tireless support and patience. And thank you very much, Susan. Would you please stand? I know this is a public forum, and I've done a very, very public work, but I have to start with a private story because, in essence, that's where my beginnings lie. When I was a little girl, I used to go down south to visit my grandmother. And at that time, the house had been divided. She had people living on one side, and there was a central hallway with the stairs that ran up the center of the house. And some people lived on the right side, and she lived on the left. And she kept the upstairs, the attic, as her own. When I would come down to stay with her, she would say to me that I would sleep in the upstairs bedroom by myself. And I was a very tiny little girl, and I didn't like sleeping in the attic, but I would do it because I wanted to be brave. And every evening she would take me by the hand, and she would walk me up to the door, and she would unlock it, down the central stair and or down the central hall and up the stairs. And then I would sleep up there, but I wouldn't sleep. I would be sort of terrified all night long. And in the morning, she would come for me, and she would walk me down, and everything was fine in the morning. And as we were going past, right to descend the stairs, she would point to a door, and she would say, "That was your father's room, and that's where he lived as a child. And I let him do whatever he wanted there. And when he grew up and moved away, I cleaned the room up and I locked the door, and sometimes I go in and just check it out." And then she would point to the room. Occasionally, as I would stand there, she would open the door and I would see a tiny bit of light, and then the door would close and she would take me back down the stairs. I never got to see inside that room or to be there until I got here at the library. And in essence, the stairs and the spirals and the nooks and the crannies are the nooks and crannies of the house that I visited with my grandmother, and the room with all that light that I so desperately wanted to be in, and the stairs that I would climb with great deal of trepidation, and then descend in the morning, and to think and to fantasize. My grandmother told me many, many, many stories, and when I was a child, and when I grew up and began to read, I realized that I had heard all those stories before, that she had told them to me, and she had also begun to make them up in her head. Somehow they were always associated with the stairs and with the nooks and the crannies and the going up to places that were a little scary and a little frightening, but you went there anyway in your mind, and if you could just read those books and open those doors and go up those stairs and go on those adventures, then you could find out all the things that there were to know, and you could experience it in a safe place, sitting up high, and you would understand, and you would visit in people's minds, and you would go back in time and forward into the future, sitting on those stairs and exploring and winding around and unraveling. And that, in fact, is what my work is about. When I come to think up an idea, I spread the books on the floor, and I go from book to book to book. And as the ideas begin to sort of ricochet in my mind, they begin to fly around and hit off of each other. And so I also thought of that sort of euphoric experience. And so the piece in the atrium is about that kind of ricochet and that exhilaration when all these ideas ideas are pulling together in all these new ways. And so in fact, that's basically what my work is about. I would like to thank James Ingo Fried and Kathy Simon for allowing me to open that door and go inside and live in that room. Thank you very much.
It's now my honor to ask Nayland Blake to share his inspiration for this project.
Well, like everyone else, we don't get right to the inspiration without some thank yous first. And I mean, my experience on working on this piece is really I've been blessed to encounter people with three qualities. One is vision, one is trust, and one is patience. It's, I think everyone who's worked on this project has had those three qualities in enormous amounts. And I know for an absolute fact that my piece would not exist if I hadn't been lucky enough to encounter people who have that. I think in terms of the vision of what should be happening in this building, it's like initial credit really has to go to Kathy and to James. It also really has to go to Kathy Page, who worked as the library's liaison for us, the library's face for the artists and for the Arts Commission. Is she's, I don't know, is she here? She's, you've gotten a lot of hands today, but really. And it's been said before a couple of times already, but it needs to be said again that these works of art are here in this form because of the vision of the San Francisco Arts Commission. And it's hard to recognize something that's always around. It's hard to see how important it is, something that's sort of always underfoot. And most of us encounter the Arts Commission when we're angry about something and we want to go yell at them. And I think we should mark, what a rare occasion. And actually, it's rare only by a fluke, actually, because most of what the Arts Commission does enriches our life in this city in an enormous way on a day-to-day basis. To extents that we probably don't even think of. But it's also important because instead of kind of taking the easy way out, the works that Rich was describing early on in the early days of public art, where the impolite term is plop art, where you kind of make the plaza and you drop the sculpture in it. That would have been so easy for everyone involved. Susan could have gone home at 5 o'clock, for 5 years if they had only agreed to do that. But the people involved from the get-go insisted that the works of art in these buildings were not going to be window dressing. They were not going to be just flower boxes. They had to be integrated with the message of that building. And when I began to work on the project, I felt an enormous amount of enthusiasm for the message and for the situation, and I had an enormous ineptitude in terms of the skills that were necessary to really integrate with that. So for me, working with James and Kathy in their offices, particularly Anthony and Alyosha. I don't know if they're here as well. Anthony Berman, who gets high marks in the patience department as well. They became de facto educators for me, and my happiest memories about this project are memories of meetings with all of the rest of the artists here as we sat down and looked at these drawings that certainly had areas in them, didn't necessarily have particular rooms for us to figure out what exactly we're going to put in there. But the enthusiasm that all of they had, and then meetings with the architects as we would discuss various different ways of trying to do something. And then my project ended up having a lot of meetings involved. When we finally got to the point where we were going to be choosing names, we convened a guidance committee made up of people who had staffed various parts of the affinity groups at the library, and then also made up of local academics, people from UCSF, USF, and UC Berkeley. They were all patient and generous with their time and their ideas, gave us great names, and then we went out to meetings at the branch libraries and got to sort of explain the piece to different people and solicit ideas from the public. So really, I have to say that this whole project, for me at least, has been a big excuse to be able to meet a lot of people and learn a lot. It's been a very direct education for me. In terms of the final results, I also really have to thank Kate Wingerson, who I think is not here because she's a library staffer and is upstairs manning one of the desks. But she was my research assistant and helped coordinate all of the research meetings, and also worked on the database of authors. Vincent Fecto was my studio assistant at the time. And also TJ and JW, who are here, I can see you. These are the guys who built the thing, so you should stand up. Yeah.
I second that motion. Thank you. Rocket Science, thank you.
To me, the piece is really about a very simple act, and it's about the act of telling somebody you know about a great book that you know about. And to me, that's, on the names, the idea of placing the names is derived from the names that are on the facade of the Old Main. And those names, in a certain way, are kind of the weight of history, kind of carved in stone and bearing down on us. I really wanted to find a way for the people of San Francisco to be able to say to each other, hey, this person is a great author. This person has meant something to our community. This person is the most stellar mind in their field. And that's why the piece is, starts out with 160 names, but leaves the opportunity open for all of us here in this room and all of us in the rest of the city to add another 200 names as time goes on. I should say we're right at the beginning of the process of figuring out how that's going to happen. So we, and I eagerly solicit your own ideas and judgments on how you would like to see that occur, because it's very important to me that an institution that is this democratic should reflect that in the art that's in it. I think that's everything, except also I want to thank my boyfriend and partner Philip, who's had to survive the 5 years of mania on the other side, the times when I wasn't in the studio. So, thanks.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Anne Chamberlain and Anne Hamilton, two very special people to me. We both share a wonderful Headland Center for the Arts connection. So I'm really pleased to be up on the panel with both of you. And why don't you talk about the project and then your collaborations?
Okay, sure. Yeah. I guess I'm going first. I mean, in terms of the question inspiration, I think inspiration is one of those things that's never there when you're looking for it. It always is something that sort of slips through the net and in the back door when you're maybe not paying attention or fumbling for something in your pocket. And so I have to say that Anne and I started this conversation because we were friends, and because doing something on this scale in its most direct manner is a lot more fun when you're out on that limb with somebody else. So we have been there together for 5 years. And when we first started working with Jim, I think even earliest on when you were showing us the models, and Kathy, we really didn't have a clue. We had no idea what we could bring to this building. And I think it was partly pointed out to us how different a process of making with materials is from building an enormous building, and how you get to that point. And so I think they tolerated and were maybe bemused by probably a dozen different proposals, none of which found a home, which is, I think it's a good thing. And I think it's what happens is when you go back to your own experiences, like Alice telling this wonderful story, it's always when you go back to those that you find that inspiration, because it's the thing that's sort of the most ordinary. And so when we again and again talked about this project, we returned to our own experiences. And we're born in an age that, or at a time that preceded the computer. So we really are very attached to these manila cards that are the card catalog system. And specifically to a system of access which is spatial and tactile, because as it became apparent to us as we looked at the models, is that I couldn't get in them, I couldn't touch them, and that we had to find a way to find a process that would allow us to think the way we think, which is partly through here. And so it seemed that it was kind of the most obvious thing to use the card catalog collection, which was being phased out, is being phased out as the transition's made to this building. And the other thing that became really important was not just the card catalog as a system, but more what it allows, because it's when you're not sure what you're looking for that you leaf through the card catalog or you browse the shelves, and it's always that book that you open arbitrarily because you like the red spine, and on that page is this word that you needed to read at that moment, and it triggers a whole nother association of thoughts. And we wanted somehow to work with that process to make a project that would perhaps parallel that. We have many, many thanks as well, and two of the thanks, in addition to all the thanks that have already been given to the Arts Commission, go to Nancy Musser, who's the chief catalog librarian, I don't know if Nancy's here, because it was really Nancy who, with, I think, some resistance on the part of some of the department, let us have access to the cards, let us pillage, basically. And it was Margaret Kilgallen, who I know is here, who was the saint, ever cheerful, ever patient, always there to help all of them, very, very many, more than 100. I think there are probably several hundred people, I don't really have a count, who helped write all of the cards. And everybody talked to Margaret, because Margaret helped people find their cards that they wanted to write on. She was the one that checked them back into the library. So, Margaret, I know you don't want to stand up, but I want to give you a hand. But most importantly, we were trying to find a way that very private experience of reading can somehow be brought to a public surface. And so when all of the handwriting that literally engulfs the machine-printed text of those card catalog cards is on there, you have a very different relationship between a book and a reader. And I think I'll turn it over to you. I'll drop mid-sentence. That's what we actually, the collaboration, more than anything, is I think we've learned to complete each other's sentences. Yeah. And you could talk about that process, maybe?
Yeah, about the collaboration. One thing just to add to the whole notion of this idea of using the card catalog, as we were coming over to here today, I said that one way that you can sort of measure that you've sort of attained middle age is that at a certain point, can you hear me? At a certain point, you realize that the technologies that have been invented since you were born feel totally external to you. I mean, the telephone seems natural, but the internet seems totally unnatural. It seems like this thing that you can never fully internalize in that same kind of way. And I think that, in a way, the card catalog has that kind of resonance, and it's really, that juncture between the old Main, which was so steeped in that history and that sense of a Carnegie kind of library. And it was wonderful to walk in here on the first day and watch how the public seems to have, in the course of 3 months, gone from 1970s to 2010. I mean, everybody's wired and on the computer. And so that's very gratifying. And I think that there is a real way in which that we are in a different era completely. I think, though, that, we were very, there is this kind of faith that really occurred in the course of deciding to let the artists in on this process so soon. And there is like this whole process of tending that, which Susan was very much involved in, and I think that we are all tremendously grateful to having that support. But I think that we did go from pillar to post in terms of what we were trying to accomplish, or what we thought we should do or could do. And at one time we thought that it'd be great to have a printing press in the library, and there were all sorts of extravagant ideas about what we should do. And I think that at one point, and we had gone through numerous proposals, and I think that Kathy said, there's this diagonal wall that goes to the building here that's an interface between the closed stacks and the circulating collection. And that immediately became very interesting to us as a way of talking about the relationship between, and the way that a card catalog functions as this membrane through which the books pass, this way in which you have to go to that point to get the books that you want. And so that became really the surface, the way that we ended up siting ourselves within this building. I think that Jim sort of thought we were kind of like a virus or something.
At one point, I think, trying to take over all the surfaces.
Completely. But I think also it is about that interface between the public and the owners of this collection, which is the whole city of San Francisco, and the ways that people access their collection, the way that people embark on a particular journey when they're going, beginning to research, and the world within the world of books, and how each one of those quotes is so much about the specific choice that an individual makes in the course of going to a library or opening a book even, and the thing that you treasure and the thing that you value and the questions that you're asking. And I think that surfacing and that the citations on the cards are really about that interface and about what that collection means to all of us as a community here.
I'm going to make a plug.
Okay, yeah, do that.
We actually, with the support of the Friends of the Library, published a set of postcards that's for sale. It's to support the library. I'm not putting it in my pocket. But it's a set of postcards that we selected, and it was a very difficult process of actually choosing just 27 cards to put in this, but they are available in the bookstore. And it's really nice to have something in a way that then goes out and circulates in a whole nother manner. So pick them up and use them.
I think the last...
Pay for them first.
Yeah, you have to pay for them. It's not for free. I think the last group that really we need to acknowledge are the people that... What?
Yeah.
That wrote on the cards, the card writers, and there were over 200 of them, and I know there's a representative group here.
I see a lot.
And actually, we see a lot of you out in the audience there. We've been smiling at you. And also to Margaret Tedesco, who did the wonderful design on this. So we'd like you all to stand up.
Where's Margaret?
She's right there.
Oh, there's Margaret.
I see you, Dara. You did some too. There are lots of you all over the place, and I know that you're shy, but
Margaret designed these.
Yeah, Margaret Tedesco
and Margaret connected the community that made this piece to this project in many ways. It was Margaret's Rolodex that we first called. Yeah. So, I think.
Yeah.
It's now my honor to introduce James Freed from the firm of Pay, Cobb & Freed. I've had a couple of embarrassing moments over the last week because both the architects wanted to see my office. my office is currently the storage room for our gift store on the second floor. So they couldn't see their handiwork, and I've asked for their forgiveness. I also told them that it was the first time in my professional career that I've had a new desk. And I'm personally very grateful for that.
We all are responsible for this, not just I. I'm not going to take the rap by myself. Okay, now, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, it's very important because I don't wear Madonna's headdress just easily. She's more fun than I am, but I do this so you can hear me. Good. Okay, now, I was going to think about what do you guys talk about? Artists and architects? Not really, because that's a long, long relationship I have. I told Alice the other day that 11 years ago, practically today, Alice was pregnant. She was in San Francisco with me, and I said, Alice, you are really going to be a little bit chubby, aren't you? She said, no, I'm pregnant. That was fine. But then I heard that first in San Francisco because what are we doing here? We invited to an artist and architect symposium at the old Museum of Modern Art. Do you remember that? Anybody here know? Anybody here know? It was 11 years ago, it was a long time ago, but it was the same thing that we're facing today. You know, artists and architects are supposed to be like cats and dogs. They're really not, but because, you know, I love working with artists. I love working with them because they give me new insights, new ways of doing things. I do things so in a traditional way, I think, but artists have taught me that I don't have to go through a process to come to an end. It's very important. I can get to the end before I get to the process. And that's super. If you think of architects, they always have to justify everything they do. Artists never have to justify anything they do. So now, if I think I'm an artist, maybe I can also justify nothing I do. Now, of course, no, it wasn't easy. I'm a little lost here, because I want to talk about the artists and architects, how we worked. I also want to talk about the artists themselves. I also want to talk about the architecture. It's very difficult because they're all different, a little bit different anyway. However, before I start, I owe a great vote of thanks to the Art Commission, and I owe a great vote of thanks to them, different than the artists. The artists had to be approved by them. They actually had the whole life of this building in their hands. You know, the Art Commission was composed of the commission itself, but they also had a civic design group. And any of the civic design people here? John Kirkin, is he here? Kirkin? Ryo Okamoto, he was a good friend of mine. Okamoto died some years ago. A very, very good friend of mine. He was very important to the city. He helped the city an awful lot, I think. I think most of you remember him probably will think that's so. However, but we had a difficult problem. We were building a civic building, and this is the first step towards the art was to make the building a reality. Without the reality here, the art was only going to be something floating around there. What we had to do then was we had to decide that there was a way of building this building, this city, other than going through the routine channels. Routine channels are very good in most cities, but they take up an enormous amount of time. And the time is gone, also your energy is gone, you just aren't ready for anything anymore. We had here, we had an approval process that was generated by the Art Commission. Some of the cities did not want that to happen at that time. Well, the Art Commission was absolutely superb for us. And Lincoln was also superb. They said no. They said this is a public building. And civic buildings are very different than other buildings. And civic buildings have certain aspects to them that are very different because they deal with this civic. They deal with the public life that we lead, not the private life. Artists more often, I tend to think, deal with the private life. Not always, but more often. I think architects have to deal with the public life. When you deal with the public life, you cannot simply say, okay, we'll do anything you want to do. You begin to look at the public realm, you begin to say that you have to do something in this realm that makes sense. And what makes sense here is not to destroy City Hall, not to destroy this really magnificent ground that you have. It's a magnificent ground that has time on its side. You know, there's a certain amount of time in the background. And this was built in 1920, a little before that. And for us to take that and sort of just lightly build anything on that side would have been wrong. I feel very much that this was also the beginning of the art, this was the beginning of the architecture. What's right there is that what you have to do, you want to do the right thing for the city. You want to not destroy what is there, but you want to augment it, you want to go ahead and you want to finish it. And that is what we did. When we start that way, then the civic committee was very much for us, and that was it. I never be able to pay back that debt. I have a great debt of honor to them. Okay, now, Once you decide that, of course, once this building was a goal, there were other things we had to do. We had to think of ourselves and think of the arts at the same time. I believe that what happens in architecture is that everything solves simultaneously. There's no such thing as a significant process. Everybody talks of process in Prague, although in San Francisco perhaps a little more process than Prague. But in any case, I believe absolutely that what you have to do here is you do everything at once, which means that you're looking left, right, I make sketches just to tell myself where I've been, just to sort of look at them and say, well, what are my intentions? My intentions are only made clear to me when I look at my drawings. And then I say, oh my gosh, not this, you have to move again. But, of course, what happens when you deal with artists, something else comes into the equation. Now, in this equation, you have another creative urge, another creative, it's demiurge, right? That's what they call it. It's demiurge, which is some godlike force that is very hard to fight against. You don't want to fight against it, but you want to use it. Madonna's it's on my head. Now, what's really important is now you deal with, say, everybody says Palladio was the first one who actually got an artist and architect collaboration. Well, if that's the case, we're in deep trouble because Villa Barbara is not really an accommodation. Villa Barbara, which was done by Palladio and by Veronese, we all know that. It's supposed to have been a real collaboration. My wife and I went there to look at it. It was somebody had said, you have this wall, this wall, this wall, please do whatever you want on that, and we'll do the rest. It was not just, excuse me? All right, now, that's not the way to work with artists, I don't think. I've worked with a lot of artists. I'm going to give you my credentials just a moment because it's unfair to me to say I've worked with artists and not tell you who they have been. I've worked with artists now in 4 or 5 buildings, and I just want to read this off to you because it shows that I should have been I should have been much more deeply in trouble than I am. I should have been much less able to just be forthright and welcome art. The fact of it is that everyone I work with was wonderful. And let's start with one thing. Pablo Picasso in NYU Silver Towers. It was Pablo Picasso did a piece called, what was the name of that? Right. Now, this is the head of Juliet. There was Silhouette. Right. Well, Picasso could make this with his mind. I can't buy that. Silhouette. And then this was a big thing that had to be done in NYU Towers. It was something that I'd never experienced before. I went out to France to talk to the man and say, do you really want us to do this? Can we do this? How will it be? He just gave me a photograph back that had been taken of the model. He wrote, D'accord. What is it? D'accord. All right, that was easy enough. But that's the last D'accord I ever got from an artist. Okay. After that, I also worked with Alexis Smith, who was great. And I found when I was working with Alexis Smith, one of the rules of working with an artist. What you don't do is you don't really collaborate with an artist. That's death. Artists don't collaborate with you, you don't collaborate with them. What you do is you work with them. And working with them is there's different values that everybody has. The artist has one set of values, artists have another set of values. You work with them, and then what you do is you try to decide the whole area that you can give up. Well, you give it up, but it's not so easy to give it up because in the end, anything you give requires more. So anyway, Alexis Smith did she took over the whole main pavilion. It was good because she had started with a little bit of one end. I said, no, let's do more. She said, let's do more. That's great. Matt Mulligan then came along and he built something into the walls of this building. He built granite pieces into the walls. You couldn't move them. Now, this then made clear another thing to me. If you just do that, that's not the highest level of artist-architect collaboration that you can take. You also actually take one that works with the fabric of the building itself. That's a little harder to do, but you did that fairly well. I thought it was a little harder to do because when you do that, whose responsibility is it again? Does it become a completely integrated project? I think not. To my mind, the important thing is that the artist fit into the building at the same time that it retains its own essence. It has to retain its own essence. If it loses its essence, you haven't accomplished anything. You've just disturbed another artist, and the essence of it is gone. So then we tried on the US Holocaust Museum, I was very problematic because being an artist in that situation was really one of essentials. Again, you had to deal with the essence. There was no room for play there. Although in the end we did play. But Richard Serra, Joel Shapiro, also Kellen Sauerwitt helped on that. They're all very different. They all were willing to help. They were all willing to collaborate. But each one had a different notion of what collaboration meant. And that's always hard. The architect has this one. He stays there. Everybody else has some different notion. Getting through that is a great, wonderful thing. If you get through that, then you have something that's wonderful. I think Richard Serra did something that's brilliant. It's absolutely remarkable. His work cannot be separated from that work. It's absolutely together. At the same time, of course, oh, good.
There.
See, artists appreciate when you work with them. Now, okay, let me go. Alice Aycock, Anne Hamilton, and Anne Chamberlain. Nayland Blake on this part. That's also very good. But now I've discovered something else. I discovered that some artists now are in the backlash. They don't really want to be buried in your building because they feel that they lose their own identity. But there we have what? We now have on another part I'm not working on, with whom I'm working on. It's Martin Purrier, who really surprised me. He did not want to do anything integral with the building. That's wonderful, though. Keith Sanier, who wanted to actually jump into the building, become really part of it. When you deal with that, you have to sort of you have to understand the nature of the demiurge that you're getting there. The nature of it is that what you get is you get something that an artist can afford to give up, and certain things he cannot afford to give up. It's always said that architects give up something, but that's not the truth. Artists also have to give up a great deal of autonomy. They work with architects. So what I think is happening is there's a much clearer view of how people will work together now, much clearer than it was in the beginning. At the same time, it's still not easy. It's very hard to do, but I think we did very well on this, and I want to thank everyone for their help in it. Thank you very much. You did a great job.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Kathy Simon.
Thank you. It's hard to beat you. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the person who is an artist, but he calls himself an architect. I have no idea why, since being an artist is much more glamorous than being an architect. But this man really gave himself to this building, and I think we all really should thank him. One of the interesting aspects of this project, and I think you could have heard it today if you listened, was that the word I was almost never mentioned. It was always we. And I think, too, that the various people, especially on the Art Commission, and I'm going to mention one of them who is here, who was on several committees, were totally part of our team in terms of getting this project done. I don't think any of you can imagine how Byzantine and Venetian this process is in San Francisco. In fact, a lot of people think San Francisco is a lot like Venice in the 15th century, built on power, money, and rumors.
Built on the Bridge of Tears.
Right, the Bridge of Sighs. In fact, we have several bridges in this, and sometimes they were bridges of sighs. But Anne Healy is sitting on the third row behind Susan Pontius, and she was redheaded at the time. See what it does to you?
Thank you, Anne.
She was a member of both the Civic Design Committee and the Visual Arts Committee. And whenever we had trouble, she would say, "Just tell me what you want me to do, I'll fix it." And she did. We'll support you. And she was amazing, as were so many others, some of whom have been mentioned. But I would like to also bring up Jill Manton's role in this project. Jill is the head of public art in San Francisco for the Art Commission. And I remember very clearly the day that she came to our office and met with Ingo and me to say, would you consider working with some artists right from the beginning? And I said, oh, yeah, well, wonderful. And he said, well, it's very, very difficult. No, he said, who are they? But then he said, but it's going to be really difficult. He kept saying to me how difficult it was going to be. And, it was harder for them than for us. Except for my office, who had to do the working drawings for various parts of these projects, which was challenging. And then building them was another challenge. But it has been really, just to tell you a little bit about how it happened, we had a wonderful wooden model of the building. And this was about 2 or 3 months into schematic design, and the building's form was established, and the space of the building was established. And we, after a long process, interviewed a number of artists, I think 8 or 9. Margie was on the committee. And the first thing we did to them, subjected them to, was this very abstract model, and said, this is the library. And it was these pieces of wood, and it didn't look like a building, it looked more like a toy. And then later, about 2 hours later, they had to come back and tell us what part of the library they would be interested in working in. So I remember Anne said everything. Alice said, I have no idea as long as it's really whirls around. And Nayland said the stairs. So you can see they really all had their ideas, but they did emerge through knowing more about the building. I remember Anne Hamilton saying, well, I'd like to kind of sit in the building when it's almost built for about 6 months and figure out what kind of material should be in the building. And we said...
Really practical.
Yeah, really practical. I also remember some very funny things, like telling our wonderful librarians, Kathy Page and Ken Dowland, they asked, well, what work has Anne Hamilton done? And I said, well, she put 20,000 pennies in honey at the Cap Street art project. And they thought, well, not in the library. You can't have pennies and honey in the library. But, and I think it taught me a lot about how people work. Each one of these artists, everyone came up, were tireless in their ideas, but I also learned something about the difference between an artist and an architect, in addition to what Ingo has said, what he said, and he said it to me before we started the project, what artists have taught him is that you could start from the beginning with the idea and fill it in with the concept, and then make it into a building afterwards. That's something he learned from an artist. It's a poor paraphrase, but what the artists learned is how flexible and easy to change architecture is compared to art. They don't like to make changes. We do it all the time. Go ahead.
They don't like to make changes because it's very difficult for an artist to be immediate. They all want to have their immediacy, they want to have their freshness, not at all charms. When we tell them they have to be done 3 years before the building's ever executed, they can't believe it. No, 3 years, what happens to my freshness? Well, the freshness has to be packed in the original document. But I think that's what happens.
I think just to finish, I think one of the most wonderful things was seeing people building these pieces. As they emerge, and also for us seeing them too, to see them beginning to take shape and suddenly being this other element of the building. But it was very fascinating to me, the Anne's pieces on each floor went up first. And every day when my people would come to the building, Anthony Bernheim was here today, we would find people who were building this building looking at those catalog cards with these hard hats on and just reading them. The joy that they took in finally having the lights on Constellation lit up. And then the incredible rocket science who installed Alice's piece and Nayland's piece. Steve-O didn't get mentioned. He's sitting in the back. Stand up, stand up.
Steve,
These people.
please stand up. Thank you. Stand up, Steve.
I mean, actually, it does take a rocket scientist to install an Alice Aycock piece. But finally, I'd just like to say that being on a limb is a lot better when you're with people like this, and it was always this incredible collective effort that made this building happen. Thank you.
As a moderator of the panel, I'm going to exercise my moderatorial responsibilities and ask a question that I've actually been wondering over these last couple of days. For the last couple of months, those of us who've been working in the building have been hurrying around trying to get everything done. Locks on doors, tape off the walls, painters. I've walked into a couple of walls that weren't quite dry. So it's been a bevy of activity. And so on Thursday, when we first saw the public come inside, it simply knocked our socks off to hear the oohs and ahs. And one of the things that I've wondered is that this is truly a democratic institution. In the last week, we've had multimillionaires and homeless people come inside this wonderful building, and their reactions have been universally awe. Pure and simple awe that a building this beautiful could have been built in this time for everyone. It is free, and we all need the access to what is in this building at some point. And so what I wondered of each of the panelists is how that knowledge that you all have had, because I was on the selection panel, affected your choice for the final decision of the work that you did. That's an easy one.
Well, we knew it had to stand up. Actually, that was a big component. that I mean, embarrassingly enough, we don't. That is sort of the other difference between artists and architects. We know that artists generally, if we can get through like the 6 months or however long the piece is going to be up without it falling over, then we're okay. Whereas architects have to worry about it standing up for much longer. So, I mean, that was an initial one for me.
I think for me, when I first started out, I made works that were very participatory, that people had to move through and experience with their bodies and their minds. And then there was a period in time in which that became very difficult to execute. And the fact that people can move through this work, all different people, and really physically and mentally move through it and participate, and watching them do it the last couple days has given me a whole new sense of what a work can be, and just watching them thread their way, and they are the movement, they are the element that completes the work, and that has been very, very satisfying to see. So.
I mean, I guess just the other thing that I would say is I think the thing that really influenced my thinking, I mean, when I first moved to San Francisco, I used to work over at the Just Desserts in the Marina near, I guess it's a Galileo that's down there. And Galileo also, the building also has these names carved into the facade. And I found myself continually like going through this list of names all the time and going like, what, you know, who picked this? Why are these here? and that was the thing that finally became the fulcrum in a way for me for the piece, was thinking about at the time when this building was finally open and people were entering it and seeing this list of names that were going to be there. And they were asking that question, who picked these? How did they get here? And the challenge for me became about how is there a way to kind of shift that to being like, we picked these. This is how these got here. It's like, we know how this happened because we're responsible for it in a different way than normally happens in a civic building.
I think I have a response. Are you in? Okay, and that was that I think it terrified us, really, for a long time. And partly was because it would be public, it would be here for a really long time, and that I would have to come back and visit it. and most of the things that at least I have done and some of Anne's are very ephemeral, and so they're not around to haunt you. And so it was initially very terrifying, and I think it was a long process, and I think that happened very much out of the conversation, partly of seeing how flexible you both were. Like, oh, you could do this, and we'll move this, and very late in the process, actually being willing to make big changes. But our conversation, it was that we had to begin to trust ourselves, really, and to think that it would be beautiful enough, it would be interesting enough. But one of the things that we kept coming back to is that we wanted it to be very accessible, you know, on a lot of different levels, the same way that the collection is. And so that's very much the process of how it was made. In fact, we didn't like choose a group to work with. It was a self-selected group that really found us. As we said earlier, many of Margaret Tedesco's friends. But it was really word of mouth and, you know, hand to hand. And I think once we saw that process going, we trusted that it was really very much an embodiment of what the library is about.
I have one other thing to say, that one of the very astonishing things to me was that there was a great deal of skepticism on the part of the city about art in the library. I mean, and you know, some people think, this is only some people, a few people, who think that the fact that our charter says that up to 2% of any building budget for a public building has to be used for art. And do you remember the skepticism? Well, one of the people said to us, it's fine to have art in the building, it probably won't work, and as long as there are no words, it'll be fine. Now, I think for me, and I think this is also true for Mr. Fried, that one of the things that why we fell in love with this project was not only that it's a people's building, which is right at the heart of it, but also that it's about the arts, it's about writing, it's about the life of the mind. These are 4 of the artists who worked on the building, but think of all the artists who are represented in this building in the books. I mean, this is a building about creativity, about the life of the imagination. Every person that we saw today walking out of the library carrying a stack of books was carrying works of art. And if you think about it, that's the most appealing, wonderful way, in addition to these great works of art that will be here forever, that the arts are represented in this building.
I have one other thing I'd like to say. I can speak this. Can you hear me? That's great. Okay, there's one other thing I want to say. This building is in itself rich in meaning because of what it encapsulates, as Kathy said. And that's anything that's as rich in meaning as this building is. Of course, artists are able then to sort of tap into that. And there's much more that have been tapped into. You know, I can imagine more artists coming along. But that precise, that richness of meaning, the one thing that we have found in architecture as well as in art today, that nobody wants to go with no meaning, no-brainers anymore. You know, everybody wants meaning. They want to say, what does this mean, what does this mean? Sometimes too much so, but you know, you still have to have some place to hide. But in the end, I think the meaning in the mind, and also the other thing that I'm saying is that this light, let me just talk one thing else. Light in this thing is for the artist as well as for the architect. It's an illuminating thing, and the light gives you pleasure of the senses, but it also clears the space for pleasure of the mind. You know? That is very important.
I think we have time for one question from the audience. No questions? Yeah. Bellow, please. Sure.
I'm Michael Levin. I recently become one of the volunteers for the library services, and just within the last month, I've had a chance to look at the building a few times, have some very brief training, so I'll know what I'm talking about, be able to tell everybody where the restrooms are and the elevators and all the important stuff, as well as the books. And we heard all about, we read about, we were told about the different works of art and the architecture, and to see you all here together is just such a wonderful treat. I wish I could take you all with me on my tours. Let me ask one little question. The amateur, inexpert architectural historian in me wanted to know. Buildings traditionally have cornerstones, and even some new buildings do. What comes to mind as a newer building is there's San Francisco Shopping Center at 5th and Market, where there's a cornerstone, very prominent. And older buildings, of course, either had the year that the cornerstone was laid, sometimes more information, the names of the architects, and you two are certainly deserving of having your name on any cornerstone. But I don't think, as far as I know, there's no engraved cornerstone in this building. Is that something you've considered at all, or is that not considered the style today?
I think we forgot.
Where is it? Why don't we have one?
I understand a plaque is going to be added.
As we conclude, there's a couple of people who you can't really see who I'd really like to thank for pulling this off. The painters were in here at noon today, and we asked them to leave so that you could all fit in the auditorium. It's been a couple of 24-hour work days for Dave Schwabe, Joan Lefkowitz, and Kathy Page to pull off today from a technical level. So I'd like you all to give them a round of applause. And I'd like to allow the artists and the architects for any parting words.
I just would like to say thank you to Rocket Science once again for working so long and hard and patiently and being like so faithful and carrying this through for me. Thank you very much.
I know it is like, welcome to another afternoon with the Mutual Admiration Society, but I do just quickly want to say that an amazing part of the process of working on this was that you normally expect, you're kind of, okay, you're the artist, you've got like the idea, and you go into these meetings and they're going to try to wear down the idea and water it down. And without exception, every time that I met with Jim and Kathy, they would fight for and suggest the most extreme, art-filled solution, always. Their response was always like, well, why don't we do it bigger? Or why don't we do more of it? Or wouldn't it be stronger this way? And that Jim was saying that architects are supposed to be like cats and dogs, and I have to say that most of my experience with architects have been that they operate under the correct assumption that architecture is the art that embraces all the rest of the arts. So it doesn't necessarily have to make much room for the other arts. And it really has been the exception to that rule to work on this project. I think it's the thing that gives this building the quality that it has.
I think one thing that's really interesting in a day and age where civil servants are usually seen hunkered down behind bulletproof glass, to see a building of this kind of generosity, of this kind of beauty, and of this kind of accessibility is a remarkable thing. And I salute San Francisco for creating that, and the architects and all of the people that put their creative energy into making it possible.
All I want to thank everybody. It's a heavy load to bear, and thank everybody here has been for it. I've not seen one sour face, and it's wonderful. Keep smiling. Thank you.
Well, I have one more thank yous also. We have to all thank the people we live with, as Nayland has. And the person I live with is a rehearsal in Mills College, but someone else lives with us here, Hermine Fried, who is Ingo's wife, and his daughter Dara, and Nils, her friend, who bear with us through all these things. And I think, actually, Michael Palmer, my husband, is a writer, and I think he's really sick of the library. But I'd also like to thank, I don't think any of them are here, but there were 72 architects who worked on the building. From Paycobb Fried, Michael Flynn, who worked on this project tirelessly, Kyle Johnson, Abby Suckle, who pulled up several all-nighters in the last few weeks to get finished with this building. Albert Hennings, who is a wonderful designer who worked with the librarians. Jennifer Sage, who was right there from the beginning. And Bob Mady. And then from our office, Anthony Bernheim's already been acknowledged, but Lamberto Morris, one of my partners, is here, and he was the person who, in collaboration, designed all the furniture in the library. He's right there. He's Italian, so he says, this furniture should be like a machine. And all the people, my partners who are here, and all of you, I mean, the project of a lifetime. I don't know, we don't know what to do next.
Are we going to do it again? Let's do it again.
Thank you so much.
Okay. What I'd like to say in closing is just a tremendous thank you. We have had a wonderful opportunity, I think, to glimpse this afternoon the type of working collaboration that really has existed between all of the artists and architects and everyone that helped create the beautiful building we have the privilege of being in today. Thank you for being so personal, and thank you for giving us that little treasure that you each imparted to us in your own unique way. I think it gave each of us a new appreciation for what we'll look at as we walk out of this room. We would like to give you just a special little thank you. Barbara Berman, a key member of our volunteer effort and a board member on the opening day committee, would just give you a little special thank you. And a huge round of applause for our panelists.
And for Chris Metz, who pulled this all off. Okay. Also, what I'd like to do is, for those of you that have been patiently watching all of this, a little bit long distance from our Latino Hispanic community room, we'd like to ask you to stand up and move your chairs to the side of the room you're in, because you're now going to have an opportunity to all come together. And the folks in this particular room, we're hosting a small reception after this event in the Latino community room. And we all urge you to come, have an opportunity to meet personally with the artists and the architects here, and just share some of the special thoughts you've had today. Thank you.
Now, before you go, one last thing. Chris, don't go anywhere. I've worked on maybe 150 or 200 events in my lifetime, and one often hears about the chair from hell. This is the chair from heaven. This is from the entire committee and the whole room to Christine Metz. And I'm giving out 2 more roses, because one can never, ever say enough thanks to Mary Louise Stong and Marjorie Stern.
I know, just saying, I am cooking.
I know. Didn't you guys have a proposal for some fans in this room? I know. I realized that I forgot to thank David Malman, and then I was like, I can't think of anybody. Well, let's face it, we have a lot to be thankful for.
I thought it were being too brief.